Just one more presentation and you guys will get out of here. They, or we could look at it like they saved the best for last, but I don't think that's true because we've had great presentations. Um, I think all the work that we've shown tonight, it's pretty amazing, pretty amazing. First of all, thank you to the Prince William Sound Regional Citizens Advisory Council. I've been a big fan of yours. For the 29 years I've been with International Bird Rescue and first learned about the RCACs here. Yeah, 60 years in Alaska, and then I retreated to warmer climes, but I think this is my 11th or 12th trip up here this year. I've spent a lot of time here. So if you don't know about International Bird Rescue, we do response to oil spills, to domoic acid outbreaks, to seabird wrecks, lots of different kinds of response, but primarily oil spill response. We are 54 years old, almost 55 years old, nonprofit based in California. We run 2 rehabilitation centers in California full-time year-round. We treat between 6,000 and 8,000 aquatic birds a year. Now, tonight I'm going to talk mostly about birds. You're going to see pictures of birds. It's because 99% of what comes in during a marine oil spill are aquatic birds. There's a whole specialized team just like mine that does marine mammals. You have to have a special other permit for that from NOAA, National Marine Fisheries. We work under our U.S. Fish and Wildlife migratory bird permit, which allows us to handle migratory birds in all of the states in the U.S., and we also need state approval for that. We do lots of work with the oil industry in Alaska as well as throughout the world, helping to write their wildlife response plans, helping them identify equipment and supplies to have on the shelf before the event, and training their first responders to be able to at least address the animal needs until we get a team on the ground. I will say that Ken Wilson at Alyeska, I like to tease him because I say that he was the wildlife coordinator at Alyeska in Valdez for, I don't know, 24 years or something. And I like to say, Ken, I predate you in the Alyeska wildlife program. But the truth be told, when we were called in to respond to the Exxon Valdez 35 years ago, it was Alyeska who put supplies and equipment in our hands in those first hours. And our very first industry contract was with Alyeska Pipeline, and they tell us that their first contract was with us, and that's been in place since 1974. So I was thrilled when you guys asked that I talk about some of the innovations since the Exxon, because I've been with Bird Rescue 29 years, and I realized as I started to think about this presentation, almost all our innovations have happened in my career, and it's been amazing. And I kept going back to the presentation and saying, oh, I got to put this in. Oh, wait, we forgot about that. And I couldn't rank them as far as what's more important. So Bird Rescue, we're dedicated to caring for oiled wildlife since 1971 when we started. We've responded to more than 250 spills. I only listed a couple of those, but we have been all over the world. I haven't counted up how many countries, but it's pretty amazing. Pretty much 95% of the protocols that are used day in and day out to care for oiled wildlife have come from our protocols and our research and our continuing research. And we operate the 2 state-of-the-art purpose-built facilities in California, and we have a turnkey facility in Anchorage. Some of you, I think, have even been there. What's interesting about that is that having animals in care 24/7, 365 in California keeps our skills up. It allows us to continue to train other people year-round. It is our playground for research, if you will, to find better ways to do this. And that's where so many of the innovations come from. Not all, because as our former director, now passed away, Jay Holcomb, he was my boss for 20 years. I was his deputy. But he was our director for 28 years before he passed away 10 years ago. And he used to always say, when we're on a spill is the time we innovate. You know, it's the mother of all invention when you need something, right? And then we just would find a better way to do it. Yeah, that's just a picture of the Anchorage Center. It's an old warehouse, but you know what? It's retrofit with everything we need. And literally, I turn on the lights, turn on the water, we're ready to go. We can take animals with us the second we walk in, we're ready to go. Because guess what? I might blow your mind here, but we do not wash animals immediately. Okay, and that is a huge innovation, huge. Those are our other two centers. San Francisco Bay is our headquarters. So beginning, we started in 1971 because two Standard Oil tankers collided under the Golden Gate Bridge. And it was a mess. And it was this huge grassroots effort, not just the wildlife, but the cleanup. Look at this picture down here from that time. You don't see a stitch of PPE in there, do you? I mean, that's kind of what it looked like in Erica on the northwest coast of France when we got there, only there were 10-year-olds out there knee-deep in the oil without any PPE. Nobody really in the world was treating oil wildlife. They didn't know if they should roll them in cornmeal. They were housed on wood chips, which we've later learned that's not how you do it. That harbors diseases and fungal spores and all kinds of stuff. Over 7,000 aquatic birds came into care, and we released less than 300. What we know today is they probably had a very short life in the wild. They probably perished very quickly. So back then, everything was very ad hoc, very grassroots. There was little funding to even research this, but our founder was a human nurse, and she went to Chevron, Standard Oil became Chevron, and said, give us some seed money to research this and find a way to do this. And thanks to them and many, many other industry entities, they have continued to fund us for 55 years. There was really no pre-planning for wildlife, really, other than, you know, a very little bit that was done here before Exxon, but certainly not in California. But today we have the legislation, like the reason our CACs exist, OPA 90 after the Exxon Valdez, and then the Lambert-Keene-Seastrand bill that happened the next year in California, which said, you know what, we're going to tax some of this oil in California, and we're going to use that to respond to oil spills. The Office of Spill Prevention and Response and dedicated funding for Oiled Wildlife Care Network came about. So that really started things going, but that's not the fun stuff. The fun stuff to talk about really is what's changed. Today we have professionals like myself working full-time in this field. It's my day job, and it has been for 29 years. And for a kid from Anchorage, Alaska, I never dreamed I'd see the world, but I'll tell you, I was in 17 countries in 1 year. Training, doing exercises for industry, meeting people, other people, going back to a spill place that, you know, we left some capacity behind, but continuing their training. That part's been amazing. Post-release studies that show that these animals do survive. Nearly 30 years ago, there was a guy named Brian Sharp who put a paper out that said, you know, you guys really only do this rehab work to make yourselves feel good. It really doesn't affect the population. Well, we've proved that wrong. And it's interesting, we did a Pribilof Island spill. Anybody remember the citrus spill in '98? Yeah, it was just a crabbing vessel, had an engine problem, probably dumped its ballast water out by St. Paul Island. And there was no oil on the beach, or really a blob in the water even, because it all went on the eiders. Now, eider ducks are an Arctic sea duck that they need their waterproofing, okay? And the natives out there started calling Fish and Wildlife, look, all these ducks are washing up. We brought 300 eiders into care. Nobody in the world has ever handled 300 eiders in rehab. But our work day in and day out with very similar species, surf scoters and other sea ducks, allowed us very easily to transition to eider care. And we got 82% of them back out there. We were thrilled when we got a 3-year, a 5-year, and a 12-year band return, because we banned everything we release. Super excited. Guy in a training I was doing up in Prudhoe Bay said, hey, my buddy shot one of your birds from the eider spill. I was like, yeah, right. Sure enough, the next day he sends me the National Banding Lab certificate that, you know, from the band, that was the 12-year band return. But lo and behold, how excited were we when we got a 22-year band return. 22 years. That adult eider, king eider, was oiled, brought into care, rehabilitated, sent back out to the islands and released, and lived another 22 years. What we know from the National Banding Lab is it's the oldest banded eider, and we think probably the oldest eider known. So Today, we know that this works. We get lots of band returns from many of the duck species that we do. We work closely with a lot of the hunting conservation groups. They're amazing. They make brood ponds. They take noxious weeds out. Anyway, so we get about 1,500 ducklings a year at our two centers, and we can put them out in the Sassoon Marsh, which is close to our headquarters, one of the largest contiguous estuarine wetlands in the country. And yeah, some of those birds get shot, but they get shot at 10, 12, 14 years old. It's pretty amazing to see those band returns. In 2003, I helped chair this group that put together the U.S. Fish and Wildlife best practices for migratory bird care during oil spills, and they are just updating that. Came out, they just kind of unveiled it at the Clean Golf Conference last week in Houston, 2 weeks ago in Houston. So I can't wait to read the updates because I had a lot to update in there. And today we have professionals like myself who are trained in emergency management, in ICS, in HAZWOPER, workplace safety, in addition to all of the specific training we've had in animal care. That's a picture in Spain at the Prestige spill. We are way up on top of this mountain, and all our pools, and then our LA center. Under each one of those sections in those seabird pens are really 6 or 8 different birds. Can't show them to you though, it's secret. But right here in Alaska, all the largest producers, as well as every single oil spill response organization, or what's known as an OSRO, I know you guys know this, are under contract to us. We have a full-time permanent turnkey facility. Now, it's not staffed unless we're activated for a spill, but it's ready. $150,000 water system. I've got a dozen pools up on the shelf ready to go. All we have to do is bring the team in. Pre-trained local responders, just about to certify another 25 people in HAZWOPER, 24-hour HAZWOPER in January. That's a free training we give to people who are on our team, because we don't put anybody in the field unless they're hired, unless they actually are employed by us. But if we're allowed by whoever the spiller is, we do run a rehab program. We run a volunteer program in the rehab center. You don't have to be hired for that. But we do lots of training up here through the industry and independent of the industry. And then our professional team that participates in exercises and drills all the time. How many of you did I see at the Valdez exercise this July? That's right. And then I know probably nobody went to the Yukon River exercise, right? Because that was a real cool one. But we get involved in all of those. And I mean, in my early years, we just weren't invited. And that's a big change. Some of the other advancements, medically, this is huge. So it took us a few years to figure out that if we medically stabilized the animals close to where they were captured, that we could very dependably, reliably transfer them even as long as 6 hours by airplane, by road, by rail, some way. And of course, up here, it might be fixed wing, it might be a helicopter, it might be a fast vessel, it might be a ferry. We've used them all. But that single thing, and I'm not talking about feeding the animals, I'm not talking about cleaning the animals, I'm talking about 2 things. Thermoregulatory assistance, just getting them warm, because once they're oiled, they can't maintain their own temperature. And the other thing is giving fluids by gavage tube. They'll never recognize a bowl of water, so we always have to do it by a tube into their stomach. Those 2 things are the single greatest thing that will save their life and increase the likelihood they're going to get through the rehab process. And even if it means we're going to keep them at, like, the Valdez stabilization unit, the brand new bird unit that sits at the marine terminal in Valdez, we could bring animals right to the dock there, get them into stabilization. Maybe we hold them 12 hours before we fly them into Anchorage to our rehab center. That's huge, because once they get there, they're usually very quickly turned around. So that I think has been a huge innovation since the Exxon. And let's talk about the new kid on the block, which is highly pathogenic avian influenza. It's a real thing. I was managing a spill in Estonia in 2002, and every day I'd turn on CNN and another Baltic state would be positive for bird flu. And we said, what are we going to do? We had about 150 animals in care. Thankfully, we had already stopped bringing new animals in. We got all the oiled ones. So we said to the government, bring us the vials that you need. We'll take the blood, because we had like 35 swans and they were hard hit there. And luckily, we didn't have any HPAI. And I thought, boy, this really has the potential to change how we are going to work and do oil spill response. And it really didn't rear its head until a couple of years ago. And we could see it work its way from east to west, and we could see it coming. Sure enough, hit our centers in California. We have an amazing senior vet, Dr. Dewar. She has so many centers around the country that just do general rehab had to close because they simply didn't understand how they could prevent other animals from, how they could stop it being passed in their center. She worked with them on biosecurity, and even in an oil spill, especially in an oil spill up here, one of our big issues is going to be screening these animals for highly pathogenic avian influenza. At first, they used to say, well, if the animal has any respiratory signs or any neurologic signs, we're going to euthanize them because it's a high likelihood they have HPAI. But after 2 years of working with it very closely, we know that there are a whole other list of symptoms that we look for. And so we just put a tent that is outside the building, the rehab center, that's maintained and staffed by personnel who know what to look for. They're going to look at every animal, and they're not going to go into the rehab center themselves until they're fully deconned. Generally, we have staff that go there to work and then leave and go home and decon completely. And they don't do it if they have any chickens at home or parrots at home, because you can pass it there. And those mallard ducks that love to be asymptomatic, they look completely well, but they're carriers. So we got to watch for them. So highly pathogenic avian influenza, we certainly practice that with a screening tent in Valdez and up at the Yukon. And so working with industry to say, hey, this is new, you need to incorporate this into the equipment. Alyeska has made some beautiful mobile stabilization units we can place close to a spill site, but we have to now include that pre-screening tent. Okay, when I said we don't wash birds right away, I know people think we take these animals off the beach and wash them right up. We do not. One of the things we learned was that it's mandatory protocol now, 24 to 48 hours of medical stabilization. So we stabilize them near the field until they're holding their own temperature and they can travel. We get them to the rehab center, and they'll probably have a minimum of 24 hours there. Maybe only 12 hours out in the field at stabilization, but they'll 24 to 48 hours of mandatory stabilization, which means we're going to give them the time to rest, because their adrenal glands are completely blown from the stress of oiling. It's synergistic with the stress of capture, like a big monster's coming to get you. They need their rest. They need to be able to start to recover from ingesting oil, all of that. And guess what else we learned? That if we crank up the temperature in the rehab center, it's not nice when you're wearing a whole full plastic suit of Tyvek and it's 80 degrees in there. But when the animals are warm, they stop preening and they stop ingesting oil. So suddenly we realized that was critical. So we take blood on intake, just 2 drops of blood. It sounds like a big deal, 2 drops of blood. And we can spin that down in 5 minutes and get results. And that will tell us how dehydrated they are, how malnourished they are, how much oil they've ingested. It tells us a lot. And so that 24 to 48 hours before we rebleed them, make sure they meet a certain criteria before they go to wash. And when we started to set that criteria, animals stopped crashing and dying in the wash. That's what happened. So that was huge innovation, huge change for us. These net bottom cages, soft-sided cages, prevent what we call bumper wounds. A bird's wings are like this, and they would bash the tips of their wrists on a hard-sided cage and get bumper wounds. Well, anytime you have an opening, that's exposure to bacteria, to viruses, to fungus, so you want to prevent that, right? You also want to prevent hawk sores from being on the incorrect substrate. They're heavy-bodied birds like loons. They don't do well on anything other than water because they live their whole life on the water. So we're going to prioritize them. They're high conservation value species. We're going to move them through very quickly. But that net bottom cage allows not only a distribution of their weight, so we have a few more hours before they succumb to pressure sores on their keel. Like loons are particularly bad about getting a keel bruise here from their own body weight. This helps distribute the weight, but it also allows their feces to drop through, which is really good because what we learned is if feces builds up on the feathers, the urates, the white part, is so corrosive, it's so acidic, it will actually eat away the structure of the feathers. And then good luck getting them waterproof. So that was a big part of this net bottom soft-sided cage. And we also learned about a ubiquitous fungus in the world called Aspergillus. Aspergillus fumigatus. It's everywhere in the world, but these seabirds, they don't get exposed to it a lot living out of the ocean, do they? They have a very advanced respiratory system with hollow bones, lungs, and air sacs. And what is a better place to grow a fungal spore than a nice, warm, moist air sac? So to prevent an outbreak of, I mean, in the early days, we'd do a 6,000 MERS spill, 6,000 MERS from the sea. And 3,000 would die because we didn't have good ventilation from Asper. Now, all of our purpose-built facilities and even our not purpose-built facilities, we bring in some way to change the air. 10 to 14 air changes per hour, and guess what? Keep your center clean. Don't aerosolize the feces with the way you clean up, and suddenly our Asper, levels, we just don't see it. I mean, we got to guard against it, of course, but huge breakthrough there. Net bottom cages and ventilation. Yeah, all of those. Out in the field, this is probably the other biggest innovation, is suddenly, I don't know why it took us a while, but it was well thought the only way you could get seabirds in hand was just to wait until they succumb to capture on the beach. And we just would stalk them, walk up to them on the beach. Then we started employing all the techniques that biologists use to capture healthy birds when they go do bird studies. Like when they're trying to catch little perching, little passerine birds with a mist net. I'm pretty sure nobody's caught eider ducks in a mist net but us. This is out on St. Paul. Here's our guys stalking birds. Those birds probably are really cold, they're oiled, they're slowed down, they're probably catchable. But to lure in other oiled eiders, we took a dead frozen one. That's the guy behind Bruce. He's already been frozen and dead. So we just used him as a decoy and put a mist net up. And sure enough, if his brethren didn't come right in. But using proactive capture techniques, suddenly we're getting these animals way earlier than we would have gotten them before. It's a trick question on my training test is, who has a better chance of getting through the rehab process? The animal, the bird, let's say he's a gull that's 100% oiled. He was like close to ground zero. He's fully oiled. Does he have the best chance, or the guy who just has maybe 20, 25% oil on the surface here? It seems like the guy with only 20% would be the one who has the best shot at getting through the whole ordeal, right? But that's wrong, because the guy that's completely oiled, we're going to capture him first. He's going to be, maybe he only got oiled yesterday or last night or 6 hours ago. We're going to turn him around like that in rehab, and he's going to be clean in 2 days and out in the pools recovering waterproofing. So proactive capture, which is just the use of noose carpets, I'll show you one of those, a funnel trap, noose poles, mist nets, any way to capture them before they become so debilitated that we could just walk up and even in Deepwater Horizon. We had trustee agencies, Louisiana Wildlife and Fisheries, Fish and Wildlife people say, oh, you gotta wait till you gotta wait. They're just not ready to be captured yet. Well, that gull that only had 20 or 25% oiling, he's going to evade capture. By flying off, we can't capture him, maybe it's 10 days. And by that time, they have spent their time obsessively preening and trying to get the oil off, ingesting more oil, and not eating and not drinking. They're that obsessed. that they don't eat, they don't drink, they just want to try and get the oil off. First thing they do is beach themselves. So using these techniques, we suddenly are getting animals in that have much higher pack cell. They're not yet anemic. They're hardly dehydrated. We could turn them around super fast. That has been a major, major innovation. And we've been doing that for about 15 years now. And other than field stabilization, I'd say those are the two big things that have improved release rates. Yeah, let's look at some. This is one of my favorite kind of traps. This is called a noose trap. It's just a piece of hardware cloth. Oh, listen, it can take, 7 or 8 people a day to make one of these, because on every join, you got to put a little teeny monofilament noose. But you put it down in the sand and sprinkle it with some nice bait like mealworms, and these little shorebirds run right across it. They're caught in the noose. You got to work it. You got to hide right by there and run out and grab that bird as soon as he's caught so he doesn't hurt himself. But California has all these endangered snowy plovers. We're now, the state recognizes us. They have snowy plovers that are oiled because they're endangered. We're the first call they make because we raise them in our centers, even from eggs. We're so successful with them. New Carissa on the Oregon coast. There are 100 known snowy owls in the whole state of Oregon, double banded on each leg, and 17 were oiled. We caught 17, released 17, and 2 years later, they saw all but one. So this is the way we capture them now. Funnel trap, you've got several people out on kayaks or canoes working to really herd, these are birds that like to hang out in a big group, and just trying to herd them into a funnel, just what it says, a funnel trap. The thing with this one is you got to have a bunch of people to run in there and pull all the oil birds out very quickly, or they will trample themselves. You got to do it in a very careful manner, let's say that. The other thing that's changed is, I always say, 20 years ago, we didn't have a seat at the table. We didn't even get in the room. And today we always have a seat at the table. When there's an oil spill, if it's one of the majors, sometimes they have an international or a global emergency response team that comes in. They quite often, if they have somebody who fills that wildlife branch director role, they usually don't know what I know. And supporting a wildlife team operationally, we're not talking about being in the environment unit, we're talking about operations. They need a deputy. But if it's not one of the majors, quite often I get called in to be a branch director for wildlife because I know how to support the team. But that's a role we practice all the time. We've got several people on our senior team that can fill that role, either as a deputy or as a branch director. And that's Selendang IU out in Dutch Harbor, where I got to spend the Christmas of 2004 or 5 and New Year's. So, being part of that operations, that whole incident management team is critical because it provides objectives and forward planning. That right there is why we do ICS, because we're looking 72 hours out. Like, it's not enough if you can take care of the animals in your hand if you're not thinking about what happens tomorrow and the next day and already reacting for that. And that's what it provides. Resourcing, we certainly don't have the bandwidth to do it all. And logistics, the communication, helping with finance and documentation are critical aspects. And that's what the incident management team provides. The majority of the animals brought into care, I already said, are aquatic birds. We also do all the small fur bearers. I like to say my deputy is literally the world's best, most experienced beaver washer, because I kid you not, she's literally washed more beaver from oil than anybody in the world. We did a spill up in Canada. They were fracking, and the oil came up in a big, big lake, and they wouldn't let us call it an oil spill, though. It was a mining incident. Yeah. 150 water birds got oiled and 110 muskrat. Yeah, she's washed more muskrat than anybody in the world, too. Beavers, you got to anesthetize. You can't, they need to be knocked down. But we would do, river otters, muskrat, Probably fox would be euthanized in the field by the state because they're mostly rabbit here, but in certain places. But all the small fur bearers, anything but the marine mammals. And we can bring a special team in for that. So a little about our resources. So our resources, guess what? They're different than every other part of the spill response. No surprise, right? This is a great picture. This is the Wildlife Stabilization Unit from Prudhoe Bay, the Alaska Clean Seas. It's, for those of you who go to Prudhoe Bay, you'll know that that's housed at U8 it's right behind MCC, near PBOC. And it's been up there. We helped him design that 32 or 3 years ago. Before my time, let's say that. But I'm in Dutch Harbor, and I'm the branch director for wildlife, and I said to the Unified Commander, I was like, the federal on-sea commander, well, we have a mutual aid agreement with all the OSROs. He said, yeah. I said, well, I want that unit. Let's put it on, like, we've never done a remote spill out in the Bering Sea where we needed platform vessels. Platform vessels it is, 224-foot crabbing vessels that have been decommissioned. But we didn't want to bring the animals inside to the living quarters. We need something discreet on the deck that will prevent us from getting oil in the cabin of the vessel. So we got that. We put it on the Norseman, I think. Yeah. And then this was our first platform vessel, the Exito, and that white trailer right here is the Alaska Shadows wildlife unit. They were kind of hoping it'd fall off the back because they needed a new one, which they now have. It never did fall off, but we had discrete areas to bring the oiled animals, stabilize them. Believe it or not, once they were stable, our guys would take them by boat to a beach where a helicopter would come down and pick them up, fly them into Dutch Harbor. My deputy would take them to the National Marine Fisheries Office, stabilize them, put them on a commercial flight to Anchorage where they'd be rehabbed. So we don't, we need stuff that nobody else needs, and we are logistically heavy. We might need fixed wing, we might need helicopter, we're sure gonna need some boats, and they gotta be dedicated to wildlife. Guess who's the last to get resourced in an incident command? So when we have dedicated resources, that's gonna work a whole lot better for us. I look at Alyeska's Vessels of Opportunity program. Can you really call it a VOO program if they already have them on contract? I kind of wonder about that. I wondered about that 3 weeks ago in Homer when I was doing the annual training. We do an annual training every year. Valdez, Cordova 1 year, then we go to Kodiak, then we do Homer or Seward. And we start all over again with Valdez and Cordova. I know all the fishermen on their vessels. Some of you are in this room, Jim. He was just in my class, but that's probably your third or fourth class you've taken, isn't it? Yeah, and we only get to Homer every third year. So, I mean, those guys are all trained. They are such a huge resource. And I just asked Jim before this started, like if you're deployed on an Alyeska spill and my team's deployed, can I put some experts on your boat? Because you could make a great team. You know the local area, and my guys know all the bird stuff. So that works out really well. But either way, in any kind of marine spill, we are logistically heavy, and that's why we're under operations. And I've worked spills where the main part of the spill was the wildlife, such as the citrus spill in the Pribilofs, or the Rena spill in New Zealand, where we had 600 little blue penguins. That's full size. They're really cute. There wasn't a lot of oil in the water or on the beach to clean up, some, but they elevated the wildlife. Instead of a branch, it became a unit, the same as operations, finance, all of that. And so we reported right up to the Unified Command, and that helps. And our communication, Alaska communications, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here. Just trying to get on a radio and call people when we were doing the exercise at the Yukon River this summer. We were very happy to hear they're getting Starlink. Let's say that they need it. And that's going to change things up here quite a bit, I think. So some of the rehab centers that we've put together at the spur of the moment, the top one is Building MSRC, another OSRO, National OSRO in Louisiana. Now they've used this for small spills for probably 25 years. Deepwater Horizon happens, somebody just knee-jerk reaction. We always use that building down at the end of the road in the boot of Louisiana where there's no infrastructure back there. Yeah, we tapped that out in day 3. And then the hurricanes started coming through. So we realized that we needed to move the rehab center. First time we've ever done that in the middle of a spill. So we ramped up this 36,000 square foot warehouse. That was like the Taj Mahal of all wildlife centers I've ever built from scratch. But you need to think about all the water we're gonna use, all the electricity. How about that wastewater? You need lots of laydown space for those frac tanks because we have oily, soapy wastewater. It's different than oily water. It has to be incinerated and hauled off. Where do you have, break rooms, things like that? That's our center, purpose-built. So we have purpose-built facilities, that's LA. Our center in Anchorage, which is permanent. It's converted, we have everything we need, but probably would tap out at a couple hundred birds. We'd need to look for a bigger space. And then, the one on the left is Bergen, Norway, in the beautiful fjords of Norway. And it looks like it's a fish food processing plant. Looks like we have a huge space, but we really only had like 3 offices up front. The good part about that was our boats, our search and collection boats, could drive right up to the dock. This was the inside of the Louisiana, the second Louisiana, the Taj Mahal. Those big yellow tubes, I brought in 80 tons of air conditioning into that unit. It's pretty big. Lots of logistics there. That's a better picture. Ventilation and air temperature, yeah. So it's one thing to ventilate, but if you're doing eiders, first when they're oiled, you got to keep them warm enough, but still move the air. And so you're sucking in new air, but you have to heat it. That's a challenge. And then all of a sudden, guess what happened when they got washed? Well, they are one of the most well-insulated animals on this earth, and suddenly we couldn't get it cold enough in the rehab center. We literally had to open the bay. It was February. We had to open the bay doors and bring the temperature down so they wouldn't overheat. But usually we keep the rehab center 75 to 85. And then you need a lot of secure laydown space outdoors for your pools, your wastewater, flight cages maybe, and a good water supply. Yeah, those are all the first center at the boot of Louisiana you could see what the media is doing. We only bring media in once a day, but believe me, it's important. If we don't tell the right story, if we don't tell the story of what's really happening, they'll go make it up themselves. And when they have enough B-roll or the boat sank or they've been to the beach, they will come to wildlife. So we usually do an open media call once a day. We have a public information officer from our team that can speak knowledgeably, but we only do that with the approval of the joint information from the Unified Command. Yeah, that's back up to the Taj Mahal. Looks like it's about to, a lot of lightning strikes. And so if you're out there cleaning the pools or trying to catch birds with a metal pole, we had some interesting learning objectives there. It was good. Indoor caging, we quite often make it, but we start with airline kennels or plastic pet carriers. You don't need just places for the birds, but you need it for the people, for, doing examinations, running the centrifuges. So that was good for all of that. That was the kitchen area to prep the animal food. That was the actual washroom, and it was up on a 3-foot height, like a stage, but the water all just fell through and got gathered up below us, so that was great. And then the outdoor pools. This was an old wholesale place for lumber, and so they had all these covered areas with nothing in between. So we just made pens, you could see, we just made cages out of them and put shade cloth out there. It worked very well to recondition pelicans, and we had skimmers out there and roseate spoonbills and everything. Okay, how do we do time? That was fast. Thank you. Oh, Jim. Oh, Jim. Jim. How'd I know you were going to do that? He was a great student. He got straight A's.
Yeah, all right.
Class all the time.
Thanks, Barbara. I think we all know that oiled wildlife is usually the thing that the public gets most energized about. And I think at least Alyeska, the state of California, realized that, and that's why they're putting so much effort into the rehab and collection.
No question.
And then the follow-on, of course, is that any critters that do die become evidence in the
Absolutely.
final settlement. So that's part of your duty too, to gather that evidence for the final.
Yeah, I didn't talk about this because, as you know, I do talk about it in our trainings. So dead wildlife has to be collected from the environment. It's part of the oil spill. It has to be cleaned up. But usually law enforcement from U.S. Fish and Wildlife takes that role in the state, and every single carcass is cataloged, and they literally have somebody from law enforcement, Fish and Wildlife, running the morgue with a locking freezer or freezer truck in the case of Exxon Valdez. Quite often it's co-located with either stabilization or at the rehab center. And starting with the Selendang IU, there was a very officious law enforcement, Fish and Wildlife person at the time, and he said, "You bird rescue, nobody's going to touch our birds. Our carcasses out there." Because we had always been allowed to bag them and tag them when we're out there already doing the capturing live animals, because our crew would see the dead ones. And so that didn't work out for him real well. And so from then on, we always ask permission to collect the carcasses too. But yeah, they mostly allow us to do that here. And, you know, that becomes evidence, as well as the live animals that come into care. We take a feather sample, we take a digital photo. Those become evidence. And if that animal lives or dies in care, whether it's euthanized or dies in care, it is also then transferred to the morgue with a chain of custody record. So it's documentation, not just of animal care, but we're also documenting our work effort, our work hours, the people that were there, all our costs, all of that. But the animal care records are huge because we start with a live animal log. Every animal that comes in is logged consecutively on that, and there's a dead log as well. Now, there's a disposition on the live log. So at the end of the spill, every animal either is released, deceased, euthanized, or transferred, possibly. It's very rare when we transfer a bird. If it's a real high conservation value, endangered species, we might transfer it to another center after we clean it. It's a big part of it, what we do, is documentation. I appreciate you bringing that up, for sure. You're ready to go home. Oh.
I'm just curious. You've really refined all these processes over the years to improve your success rates. And I'm curious, like with like the regulating the or stabilizing the bird as one of the key things. Can you explain like how did you learn that through experience, or was there an effort to research it like systematically? Or
Well, both, really both. But and we work in California. We work really closely with the University of California, Davis, because guess who runs the Oiled Wildlife Care Network for Cal Fish and Wildlife and OSPR is the University of California, Davis School of Veterinary Medicine. So they administer the Oiled Wildlife Care Network, of which we are the lead responders. That only happens in California. So they're always in the command center, right? Okay, they do all this training. But they give about, I think they have $1 million or more a year that they put out into our community in our field for, much like Osri will fund things out of Cordova, if it will help the wildlife in California, but obviously if it helps there, it'll probably be applied across the board, right? So in the early days, they did do a lot of studies. OSPR and OWCN funded a lot of studies like that, but we also noticed that that's where first it started, okay, 24 to 48 hour medical stabilization and rehab before we wash them, because they were crashing and dying in wash. So that's when we started doing blood work. And sure enough, fewer birds were crashing and dying. And now it's such a rare event, such a rare event. I'll tell you a secret. We have something called a quick wash, and we only use it when it's diesel or jet fuel. Jim, what did I say about that in our training? How often do we do a quick wash? Very, very seldom. So seldom that it really takes approval from God and our senior management team. Like we all have to be in agreement because it is as likely to kill the bird as it is to save its life. And that's why we, it's just so stressful. And we only do that to prevent skin burns, and we see some horrendous skin burns from the highly refined products like jet fuel. So it's interesting, I don't know. They don't crash and die in the wash anymore. Let's say that. It's very, very, maybe on a huge, even a huge spill, you might not even ever have that happen if we're doing our job right. Yeah. My pleasure. Thanks, you guys.